Okay, as I said, we've got quite a few slides for us to go through this morning. I'm not just going to, speed through them just to get finished. If we don't get finished, that's fine. So if you have, as I'm going along, if you have comments or questions, just please raise your hand. We'll stop and take those and listen to those comments and discuss those to whatever extent we need to. Because the purpose for us being here is not to get to the end of Genesis this morning, but to understand what we're studying. And this is pretty much straightforward from what we began on Wednesday evening, talking about Israel's last days. And of course, this is Israel, the man, the father of the nation, not the nation. But after these days, after Israel's last days, we begin learning about the nation of Israel and how God dealt with them and prospered them and used them to bring about the lineage through which Christ came. And so, foregoing any in-depth review this morning, we'll just go ahead and get started. Wednesday evening, if you were in class, you remember that we talked a little bit about this information concerning Israel's last days. And we talked about we talked about him being sick and how word came to Joseph that he was sick. And so Joseph gets Manasseh and Ephraim, his two sons, and goes and visits Israel. Why is it that Joseph didn't know right away that Israel was sick?
Was it because he was with Pharaoh?
He was. He was living, I guess, in the capital city or wherever that household was at that time. And Israel's over in what part of the country? Goshen, right. And so they're not in the same house. They're not even in the same city necessarily. And so their messenger comes to Joseph and he tells Joseph, hey, your father's sick. You probably need to come. And so he went to Jacob's side. And so when Jacob heard that Joseph was coming, he strengthened himself. He when we know our children or grandchildren are coming, or a good friend or someone, we make ourselves feel better, recognizing that when they come to see us, they don't necessarily want to hear everything that's bad about us and what's going on, but we want to, we look forward to that. And so Jacob told Joseph of the land and the sea promises that God had given to him. He does not talk about the nation promise at this specific time, but he does mention that a little bit later on in our study. And so Jacob, as we stated on Wednesday evening, claimed Manasseh and Ephraim as his own. And Jacob says, I'm going to bless these two sons of yours. They're going to be my sons. And whatever sons or whatever prodigy you have after me, after these two, will be yours, but I'm taking Manasseh and Ephraim. And I made the point on Wednesday night that maybe only a grandfather could get away with that. Right. But here the patriarch of the family, Israel, he's the one that is calling the shots, so to speak. I mean, his will is to be done. And so Joseph didn't kick up about that. He knew that Manasseh and Ephraim would be taken care of no matter what. And so Jacob goes on then to tell him about that. Jacob reminds Joseph that his mother died along the way toward Ephrath or Bethlehem. And he buried her alongside the road. And I'm sure that was a difficult thing for him, because where was the family buried?
Was it in the cave of Machpelah?
It was, yes. And the cave of Machpelah was in the area of Mamre or Hebron. And so they were not near Hebron at that point in time. And so they buried Rachel along the way. And Moses makes a point to tell us when that occurred that her grave is there to this day, at least during the time of Moses. And so Jacob then asked Joseph who had come with him. He doesn't know his grandsons, but specifically Jacob's eyesight is failing. He's in his last days. He's getting older and older, and so it's almost time for him to die. He said, "Who do you have with you?" He said, "Well, these are my two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. You know, the ones you claim." So Jacob said, "You know, I never thought, Joseph, that I would see you again. But now I've been able to see my grandchildren as well. And God has really blessed me as a result of that." So it's a wonderful meeting there of Jacob and Manasseh and Ephraim. Evidently, they met up into this for a reason. We don't know why that would be. But nonetheless, Jacob was very delighted to see them, to meet them, and to be able to be a part of their lives and they of his, and then he begins to bless them. He blesses Ephraim and tells Ephraim that he would be greater than Manasseh. And we talked a little bit about this Wednesday night, how that Jacob arranged so that he blessed Ephraim first. And we'll talk about that more here in just a moment. But this kind of displeased Joseph. He says, "No, Father, Manasseh is the firstborn." And Jacob says, I know my son. I know who was born first." But then he blessed Ephraim first, because he would be the greater. He blessed them by God's great name. Jacob, when told by Joseph that he had blessed the youngest, as I mentioned, said, I know. And it's almost, let's look at the passage where that occurs in verse 14 of chapter 48 of Genesis. Let's go back to verse 13. "And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand and laid it on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, 'The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and may my name live on in them in the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth.'" And so verse 17 tells us that Joseph was displeased. He grasped his father's hands to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head, and Joseph said to his father, "Not so. For this is the firstborn." But his father refused and said, "I know, and I know." And he said, "Also, he also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." And he blessed them that day, saying, By you Israel shall pronounce blessing, saying, "May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Okay, so let's go back in history just for a moment, and let's think about Jacob and Esau. Who was the oldest?
Esau.
Esau was. Jacob received the correct, and he received the father's blessing. Again, two different things, two different blessings. And so now, to his favorite son, and maybe his favorite grandchildren, we really don't know about that, but he blesses Ephraim first and Manasseh second. And so if that has anything to do with him and Esau, I don't know, but it is ironic very much that is what happened. Yes, George?
Well, speaking about that, he always seemed to favor the youngest. Well, Joseph was the youngest at the time he was sold into slavery, and he really mourned the loss of Joseph. And then Benjamin came and helped, but he still liked the youngest for some reason. I mean, that's what I say.
Right. And what reason would he have for liking those two individuals?
Well, they were the sons of his youngest, most well-favored son.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, why would Jacob like Joseph and Benjamin the best? Billy, yeah, Jeremy.
Because they were Rachel.
Rachel's sons, that's
Yeah.
right. And Rachel was the wife he loved the best. And so that gives us an idea of a little more better idea of what's going on. And you're right, he does love the youngest, and I think that is because of Rachel, whom he loved so dearly. Okay. All right, so as I mentioned, Jacob said that Ephraim would be greater than Manasseh and that he would become great in the midst of the earth. And so Jacob then, at the close of the chapter, blesses Joseph and his sons. And so verse 20, he blessed them that day, saying, By you, Israel, shall pronounce blessing, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. And I will give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. Right. So he blesses them, and he blesses Joseph doubly, and he says, I'm going to give you a possession more so that I took from the Amorite with my sword and bow. This is most likely the area of Shechem where Jacob had lived for so long. Now, we do know that Shechem originally had been inhabited by Shechem's father, and I can't think of his name right offhand. Seems like to me it starts with, and sorry?
Is it Hamor?
Hamor, maybe, yes, I believe it was Hamor. I was going to say it starts with an H. And so Hamor and Shechem, and you remember the situation with Dinah, and Simeon and Levi went in and wiped them out, and so they lived there without other inhabitants at that point in time, at least other leaders in the city of Shechem. And so this may very well be what he's talking about here, but he's not really referring to Shechem and Hamor specifically, but others that came in and would try to take that. The Bible is not really specific about what happened on that occasion. That's just my surmising, so take it or leave it. It's, you know, that and a quarter might get you a phone call. I don't know if you can still get a phone call for a quarter. But nonetheless, that's kind of wrapping up what we talked about on Wednesday evening. So Israel tells his sons' futures, beginning in chapter 49. And in our study guide for the information there, beginning with chapter 49, Waldron's put the title, Jacob Blesses His Sons. And really that's, I guess, a better title for what we're going to talk about, although it does not seem to start out with blessing, does it? The first three sons really don't get the lion's share of what we thought they might have normally because of certain situations, which we'll talk about that. But it seems more like cursing, doesn't it, to begin with, than blessing. But nonetheless, I think generally speaking, chapter 49 does talk about that. Jacob's words, as we see him speak in chapter 49, are obviously inspired by the Holy Spirit. And the reason I say that is that he includes not only history in this chapter, he also includes prophecy. Some of it which has to do with the initial movement of the children of Israel into the land of Canaan, but some of it has to do with the very lineage of Christ as well. And so some of that prophecy, would be fulfilled sooner than others. So now while we're talking about prophecy, I go back to Genesis chapter 12, where God blessed Abram, and he would make of him a great nation, provide a land for him, and through his seed all nations of the earth would be blessed. Did Abraham receive the fulfillment of that prophecy? He didn't, did he? Did Isaac receive the fulfillment of that prophecy? No. Did Jacob see the fulfillment of that prophecy?
Oh, no.
Okay, so he's still, even to his sons, as we have studied, he's still telling about the land and the seed and the nation, promises that were given to his grandfather Abraham and to his father Isaac, and now he's bestowing that upon and prophesying that about his sons. Even with, what do we say, 70 souls, that's still not a nation, is it?
No.
There are people living today that probably have 70 people in their family. It's kind of unusual. My father's family had 13 children in it, so it was very easy for us, and I imagine that we number 70 at least, even with those that have passed away. But nonetheless, that's not a nation. And so the fulfillment of those things would come about. They certainly hadn't received the land yet, except from the standpoint that they lived in it and sojourned in it for a period of time. But that was real land, and Christ had not come yet, which was the fulfillment of the seed promise. And so now Israel is beginning to tell his sons about these promises and what they mean and how that they're going to be fulfilled. And they'll see some of this coming, although they will not see the fulfillment of those prophecies and promises. It will come at a later time. And Hebrews spent some time talking about that. So Israel assembles his sons together. He calls all of them and tells them what would happen to them in the future, what would come about with their families. And he called them to attention and began to address them one by one, just like every family gathering. For example, this morning, when we came together, and almost every time that we come together, unless there's extreme sadness among us, we're busy talking and sharing and those types of things. And when I get up here, I say, okay, it's time for us to start. And I don't want you to think that I'm unhappy with you when I say that, even though I'll make some snide remarks sometimes. I'm not unhappy with you. I'm happy that I have to do that, because when we come together, we're glad to see one another. We talk and we have conversation and say, what you been doing this week and what's going on with you and all those things. And so it's the same thing with Jacob's family. They didn't live in the same house. So when they gather together and the patriarch is standing there and he's calling them to attention, they give his attention. They give their attention to him. They cut off whatever it was they were doing. This is important, what he's about to say, and we're all wondering what it is, and maybe that's some of the conversation to begin with. But he calls them to attention, and he begins to address them one by one. Now, to tell you the truth, if I'm Judah at this assembly, I'm beginning to wonder what's going to happen. Because I'm the one that's responsible for selling Joseph. Yet he begins with the oldest, and that is Reuben. Reuben, you are my firstborn. You're the beginning of my strength. However, you boil over. You're unstable as water. Sometimes we use the phrase today, you're weak as water. All right. What that means is that you can just be led from one end to the one side to the other and one path to another very easily. You will not have the preeminence over your brethren because you defiled your father's bed. And that's referring to the time where Reuben took Bilhah, the handmaid, and laid with her. And so Reuben is put out of the house to the extent, not that he's no longer a son, mind you, not that he no longer receives blessings of being a son of Israel, but he's not going to be the preeminent one. Murphy.
I was meditating on it. I was driving in. Don't you know that the words of his father to Reuben must have stung? I think they were intended to.
Yeah, they very well have. Yeah. And that's another thing that we notice about these words of Jacob. These are not words, and that's why I say that it was inspired by the Holy Spirit. These are not words that his natural affection for his sons would say. And there's a point to that. There are times in our family's lives when we, as the patriarch or matriarch or mother or father, grandfather or grandmother, whatever you want to say, has to be firm in what we say to our children. And that's not easy. Because we love our children, we want them to have the best, we don't want to hurt their feelings, and we want to see them and want them to be happy when they think of us. But sometimes we have to be firm. And this is one time when Jacob did that. So he says that to and Simeon and Levi were considered the brothers of violence. And this is the very thing that I referred to a moment ago in connection with the incident concerning Dinah. Israel did not want to be a part of Simeon and Levi's council. He didn't want his glory to be a part of their assembly because they slew a man. Actually, they slew every man of Shechem in defense, quote unquote, of Dinah. I'm sure that Jacob was very distraught. And as we read that account in the book of Genesis, we know that to Jacob they've been defiled. And rather than sending for his sons immediately and causing a stir and uprising, he waits till they come in from the fields, from the pastures. And he sits them down and he tells them what has happened in connection with Dinah. And Simeon and Levi take upon themselves to exact revenge after they have feigned to be friends with Shechem and Hamor and their people and said, you go and you circumcise yourself because it would be a shame for us to allow our daughter to our sister to go and be married to those that are uncircumcised. Goes and he talks his people into that. And you remember that story. And as they were recovering, Simeon and Levi go in and they slew every male in the town. And essentially what Jacob is saying is that this is not acceptable for my children to do, nor is it acceptable for God's children to do. You have done worse than Shechem in going and killing this man and these people. So, very, very specific, very, very cutting words to Simeon and Levi as well. Depending on the translation that you look at, he says that Simeon and Levi have hocked an ox. In other words, they've hamstrung it. So it's no good anymore. Not profitable. They've eradicated a prince, and this would refer to Shechem, the prince of the city and Hamor's son. And they've digged down a wall. And that refers to their destruction of that town or city of Shechem and its inhabitants. So they had not done the proper thing or a good thing at all in trying to defend Dinah as they had. And Jacob really lets the hatchet fall on this occasion. He cursed their anger. He cursed their wrath. He said that they would be divided in Israel. But here again, Levi was the father of what important man or men? Two men.
They were the priests.
Okay, they were the priests, and so he would have been the father of who? Moses and Aaron, that's right.
That's right.
So Moses and Aaron came from this lineage. And what that tells us is that God used this lineage to give himself glory and honor. And he took something that could have been bad throughout the generations and he used it for good. And it also tells us we don't have to be like our father. So it comes then to Judah. His brothers would praise him and bow down to him. He would be the fear of his enemies. A lion's whelp whose lineage would grow into a great leader. You're familiar with the movie Lion King. You know, Simba is the son of a great leader, and you know, for a while he's ousted, and then he comes back and he grows to be the leader of the Lion Kingdom and all of that. So he becomes the Lion King. But Judah here, who was actually the one that sold Joseph into slavery, has now become surety for his family, except for Joseph, as he takes them down to get grain and come back to his father. And he takes the young son Benjamin down and protects him and puts himself in the place of danger instead of allowing Benjamin to be there. And it turns out good because obviously it's Joseph testing them. But Judah would rule until Shiloh comes, the Messiah. Let's turn to Ephesians chapter 2 for just a moment. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14. Ephesians 2 and verse 14. In verse 13, the writer states, "But now in Christ Jesus, you who formerly were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who made both groups into one and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall." I've got the wrong passage. I am in Ephesians. I am in chapter 2. I am reading 13 and 14. Oh, I see what it is. I'm sorry. The word peace in verse 14. I just forgot my thought for a minute. For that is Christ, he himself is our peace. And so the idea of Shiloh coming, that refers to peace. That's the idea of peace. So Judah would rule until Christ came into the world. And so that would be the greatness of his rule. He would be the strength of Israel's sons. His kingdom would be, and his tribe would be the most faithful up to God until that period of time when they completely turned away. And so he's the ruler. He's the lion, if you will. But the Lion of Judah was Christ. And Christ brought peace and broke down that middle wall of partition which stood between the Jews and the Gentiles. And he came through Judah's lineage. Sorry for that brain malfunction there, but that's what I was looking for. Our peace, Shiloh. Verse 11 speaks prophecy concerning David, as well as the fulfillment of Jesus coming through the lineage of Judah. We turn back to our text of Genesis chapter 49. Genesis chapter 49 and verse 11. Alice, would you read that for us, please?
Out of his donkey to the vine, he washes his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes.
Okay. All right. So there are several things in this passage that makes us think of Jesus. First of all, he talks about the foal, the donkey's coat. Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the foal of the donkey. He is the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, referring to royalty. His robes in the blood of grapes. That's the idea of royalty, but also it brings to mind, to me, a couple of things. First of all, the first miracle of Jesus in turning the water to wine. And then secondly, figuratively, when he gave his blood on the cross of Calvary. So those things are, descriptive and prophetic, but they do remind us of those types of things and those events that occurred in the life of Jesus. Any comments or questions about that? Yes, George?
You were talking about the actions of Levi and Simeon. When you get in the New Testament, especially in Romans chapter 12, talking about vengeance and the like, Christ brought that into effect. Vengeance belongs to God, not to us.
Right.
And through the people that he appoints as the law and the leaders. We just learned that we need to control our emotions.
Yes.
Good. Very good. Zebulun. Israel speaks of the dwelling place of the tribe of Zebulun and Canaan on the sea, a haven of ships, traders, and much goods. And so Zebulun would be one that would be conducive to trade, that area which they lived in. Here and now is prophecy concerning them settling in the land on the seacoast, close to Tyre. Issachar, a working class of people who would prosper in agriculture. And so when he talks of Issachar, excuse me, in verse 14, he says, Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between the sheepfolds. When he saw that a resting place was good and the land was pleasant, he bowed his shoulder to bear burdens and became a slave of forced labor. And so a couple of things in connection with Issachar here. Known as a hard-working tribe, but at the same time, they were some of the first that were put to servitude because they were up there in the north portion of the country where the Mesopotamians and those people from the east would come down and afflict them from time to time. And so they would have tribute not only from those among the Canaanites, but others as well. Dan would judge his people. The famous judge Samson was of the tribe of Dan. And he was, maybe not the most gentle of men, maybe in some cases not the wisest, but God used him to judge the Philistines and his people as well. He was cunning, strategic, and subtle, attributes of the adder that are mentioned here in Judah's description of Dan. Dan would gain victory over his enemies by subtle, like an adder. So you remember Samson and his riddles, and how his riddles were hard for the Philistines to understand. And the only way they could understand them was by, getting Delilah to go in and get the answers from Samson. You remember also him tying the foxes' tails together and letting them run through the crops and destroying the crops. So lots of things like that, strategic, cunning, subtlety, those types of things.
He was also a Nazarite.
Yes, he took a Nazarite vow, that's right. Jacob's strength was fading at this time, and he's going through and telling all of these things about his sons, and it's in this point in time Moses reveals to us that he just feels like he has to take a breath. The passage states, I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. It's almost like my time is near. I'm ready. Verse 18, where he says, for thy salvation I wait, O Lord. And then he goes on to talk about Gad and the other sons. Jacob looked for a better country. He lived in prosperity at the very end of his life in Egypt, but he was not well enough and young enough to enjoy it, even though he was there about 14 or so years. But he looked for a better country. Let's look at Hebrews 11 quickly. Hebrews 11. And we're looking at verses 13 and 14. Janice, would you read those for us, please?
I have to apologize, I didn't bring my tablet.
Okay.
These Bibles have really small writing.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
Sorry.
How about Debbie? Could you do that for us?
These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. Grace them and confess that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland.
Okay. Seeking a homeland or a country of their own. And so Jacob knew that he would not see the land of Canaan fulfilled, but that wasn't even the land that was in his mind. The land that was in his mind was the land where God dwelt, the God of his father Abraham and Isaac. And so then he goes on to talk about Gad. Gad means a troop. Gad would often be in war with the Canaanites. However, Gad would often prevail. Not ever prevail. And so Gad, troop, being a ready army almost, a standing army it seems. Gad was quite involved in defeating the Canaanites and fighting for their land. Asher means blessed. Asher would inhabit the coast between Tyre and Mount Carmel. And so they would be south of the area of Zebulun. And there they would prosper. That was a very goodly land. It was a land where much could be grown, and much could be used in regard to fulfilling life and helping with their other brethren as well, because it was a very fertile region for corn. Naphtali is described as a deer let loose. This tends to an idea of a tribe ready for dispatch in any new endeavor. Unlike the steady and laboring donkey, they were yet useful. Naphtali would also live in a very prosperous area. And so that's not to say that Naphtali did not take care of his own, did not provide for his own, but he was always ready for that new endeavor, ready to help his fellow tribesmen in whatever they needed. And so that was the type of person he would be and the type of tribe that Naphtali would be. And when we see Naphtali, or what Naphtali would become, and his other brethren who were just hard workers, they put their head down and they'd just go after it. It takes all of those types of people to get things done collectively for a nation. And so when we run into people today that are not like us so far as, what we do every day, or what maybe our work ethic is, and I'm not talking about those that are lazy and won't work, those that are interested in living off of other people. I'm talking about those that are interested in doing their part wherever they can. They use their talents as they can, and Naphtali is one of those examples. Then Jacob comes to Joseph, and he says, Joseph, you're a fruitful bough beside the water. The blessing of Joseph is full, as well as history of what he had been through. It's a blessing of prophecy, a blessing that has to do with his background and his history, but also it's showing us that what Joseph had prepared for his family through the strength that God had given him. He took care of his family. He saved his family from that great family, eventually of Egypt, with a high hand, so to speak, with much goods. And yes, they did suffer. And we'll talk about that in our next study. But at the same time, they were able to go out with, as I stated, a high hand. Joseph was both shepherd and foundation of his family. His faith never failed. And I think that that's why that Moses directed by the Holy Spirit, spent so much time talking about Jacob's life in the book of Genesis. He showed how that Jacob's faith never failed. He was always strong. He was always for fellow Egyptians, but especially for his family when the time came. And so that's the mark of a very strong man. Benjamin, as Jacob concludes his blessings on his son, is a ravening wolf. And so again, here I make the point, it's obvious that Jacob was prophesying by the Spirit rather than by his natural affections. Benjamin had become, after Joseph had left or was gone, Benjamin had become Jacob's favorite. So why would you call your favorite son a ravening wolf? Benjamin would prosper in war and the spoil of his enemies. The apostle was of this tribe. He tells us at least 2 times in the New Testament that he was of the tribe of Benjamin. At the end of blessing his sons, Jacob commanded them to bury him in the cave of Machpelah, which Abraham bought from the Hittites. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah were all buried there. When Jacob finished, and what I mean by this is when he finished blessing his sons, it seems from what the text tells us that he died right there in his bed in front of his children. And Joseph fell on his neck after the death of his father. And so what a story that's told here in the book of Genesis concerning this great father whose name was Jacob, changed by the angel to Israel and later confirmed by God the Most High as being Israel, the father, the patriarch of a great nation of people. And here he dies at the age of 147. So he spent 17 years in the land of Egypt. Any comments or questions about that before we move on? Okay, so in Genesis chapter, we really have the history buried. And Joseph, after his death, Joseph prepares Jacob's body. He sends for the embalmers. And the embalmers' process lasted about 40 days. It took about 40 days for the Egyptians to embalm a body. And the Egyptians mourned for Jacob 70 days. So that tells us something, doesn't it? We don't know, and in reading this, I get the idea that the first 40 days of that, the embalming process, was included in the 70 days. I don't know. It could have been that they started mourning after that, but I would thought that, when word came that Jacob had died, that they would have begun mourning at that time. But nonetheless, this shows their gratitude for Joseph. This shows their respect for Joseph's father, Jacob, who had raised such a son, who had come to their land, who had prospered. Even though he was a shepherd, the Egyptians mourned for 70 days. And so then after that period of time, Joseph asked to go bury Jacob. He doesn't approach Pharaoh directly. He actually sends a messenger to plead his case to Pharaoh. I don't know if that's the way things were done at that time or why he didn't go himself, but that's the process that he took. And so he told him how Jacob wanted to be buried in Mamre at the cave of Machpelah. And Pharaoh told Joseph, "Go and bury Jacob as you've promised." So this Pharaoh was very respectful of Jacob as well. Certainly was he respectful of Joseph and thankful for him. And so they got together, the family and many others, in this caravan they took from Goshen on up into the land of Canaan. Those who went with Joseph were all of the servants of Pharaoh. So Pharaoh is making a sacrifice himself during this time, isn't he? While he does not go to Canaan, he still has a nation to rule. He sent all of his servants. He sent the elders of his house. He sent all of the elders of Egypt. And all of Joseph's family went except for the children and the animals. A great caravan of horses, chariots, and people. I can't imagine what that caravan would have looked like. But nonetheless, it was a great company of people. And even as they went on up into the northern section of the country, before they even went across the Jordan River into Canaan, people of the land recognized this. They said, the Egyptians are in a great mourning over someone. And so, by and large, what they would see, what people would notice is in this caravan would be Egyptians, right? They had Egyptian horses, they had Egyptian chariots. All of these people were Egyptians except for maybe, 20 or so. And so they came to the threshing floor of Atab. When the company approached that threshing floor on the eastern side of the Jordan, they were waiting for Jacob for 7 days. It's almost as if Joseph had gone as far as he could go without just letting it out again. And they stayed there on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and I don't know where the threshing floor of Atab was, but somewhere on the eastern side of the Jordan River. They stayed there for 7 days. The people of the land named it Abel Mizraim, which means mourning for Egypt. And so after that period of mourning, they went over into the land, and Joseph buried Jacob there in Mamre. Everyone that went up to Mamre returned to Egypt. Joseph's brothers thought that now Joseph would exactly on them now that their father was dead. Let me stop just before we talk about that and raise a question here. Have we ever thought, why did Joseph's brothers not stay in Mamre? There's no mention at this specific time of the famine for all intents and purposes. I believe the famine is over because Joseph had already given seed to the nations, specifically to the Egyptians and to his family, and perhaps others. He'd given seed to them in order to plant and grow. So it must have been that by this time the famine was over. The only thing I get their families, but they have no intention of going back to Canaan at this particular time. And it may very well be because things worked out so well with Joseph. They were afraid that he was going to take their life. And so his brothers sent a messenger to him to tell him that Jacob had commanded him to forgive the brothers' sins against him. That's quite convenient now that Jacob's gone, isn't it? But Joseph didn't look at it that way. He wept. And he said, "Fear not. Am I in the place of God? God sent me down here. You thought you were doing it for evil, but God meant it for good. He brought me down here to save and preserve life." And that's what has happened. And so it's not you. It's not me. It's God. And God has taken care of us all this time. And so my brothers, be at peace. Joseph and his family lived and prospered in Egypt for a while longer. Joseph was able to see his great-grandchildren before he died. The children both of his descendants, both of Manasseh and Ephraim, and to the third generation. He was embalmed and put in a coffin in Egypt, commanding his descendants to take him up to Canaan. I don't know anything about archaeology, but I would sure like to see that coffin that Joseph was buried in. I imagine that that was one of the finest of the sarcophaguses, if I said that correctly, that was ever made, because of what Joseph had done for all of the people of Israel and the surrounding nations. So here's a man, a great man of wealth, a greatly respected man. He held the second highest position in all of Egypt, saved countless numbers of people. But you know what meant the most to Joseph? Is that he had a family. Most importantly, he was right with God. And all the things that we can say about this great man, the greatest is that he was faithful to God.
And that a remnant would be after that.
Yes.
Through these people.
Yes, that's right. There was a remnant preserved. Yes, Ken.
I don't think there was anything negative said in the scripture.
Yeah, in our studies, I don't recall anything.
Yeah, I mean, the leadership of that maybe is he didn't ask. That's not even true. I don't think there's anything.
Yeah, we do know that he tested his brothers a little bit, but that served a purpose as well, because he needed to know who these men were. You know, are they my brothers that I remember from 17, or are they my brothers that have matured now, that have shown me that they indeed love their father and they love their brothers, and they're concerned about their families. And to their credit, they proved true in that regard. Okay. Yes, Murphy.
In Joseph's statement, "Fear not, for I am in the place of God." There's some tremendous lessons I've on in my in P3. I've got a lesson from Bill Hall, and Bill talks about the fact that there are times that we are asked to be put in the place of God. You know, somebody's a Jew and they didn't believe in Jesus, but surely don't you think that they're going to be saved? They're asking that's in God's hands. And then I've experienced it where somebody in my in-laws, well, you know, I'm just sure my mother's in heaven and so forth and all. And the way I answered that question, I looked at my wife, I said, I'm not in the place of God. They're asking me to determine someone's eternal destiny, and I'm supposed to agree with them. That like I'm offering that person,
Right.
and it makes them mad, so big. And in the context here, I believe Joseph is saying, if there was going to be vengeance taken here, it wouldn't be mine, it would be God's. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Certainly we need to learn how to stay on our end of the stick.
That's it. We're whittling on, as Ed Wagner said, let's don't whittle on God's end of the stick.
Okay, very good. Thank you for your attention and your comments. We will go through the questions on Wednesday.